Coming up, Debbie and I are going to do our Friday roundup, and there's a lot to cover. The new Pope, Mark Zuckerberg's strange new vision for AI. Basically, he wants to supply you with some new friends, digital friends. Kilmar Abrego Garcia's human smuggler job, Trump's cartel solution, Newark's air traffic controller problem, and Texas's own state rep, Dade Phelan, who has apparently made making memes illegal in Texas. Hey, if you're watching on X or Rumble or YouTube, listening on Apple or Spotify, please hit the subscribe or the follow or the notifications button. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
There's a bunch of stuff going on this week. Pretty diverse menu of topics that Debbie and I plan to cover. But it's been a bit of an odd week because right in the middle of the week, I marched off to Dallas because we have grandchild number 2 that is, due today. In fact, this afternoon, we will finally know we'll know the sex.
Yep. And will I be right or wrong?
Right. So I don't know if you're going to be right or wrong. I think you're actually this time in the mainstream because my sister in India, Nani, says boy.
Yeah.
You say boy. Mm-hmm. And the way I look at it is if it's a boy, then it's a nice kind of complimentary boy and girl. You know, you've kind of got both sides of the coin. But if it's a girl, then little Marigold has like a buddy, right? In other words, she'll grow up with a sister who is just a year and a half younger. In fact, I think you made the point that she'll never know life really, or she'll never remember a time when she didn't have a sibling. And that is actually, I guess, kind of an argument for having them a little closer together.
Mm-hmm. That's about the only argument right there.
You think because it's quite a...
Poor Danielle. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be tough.
My family in India jokes because my niece, Tracy, whom you know very well, had her baby. But because the way India is, they have an army of helpers. And they've got extended family, they've got help. And so they kind of marvel how in America we don't do it that way. You basically fend for yourself and you raise the child or children, as the case may be, on your own. And that's just the American way where you kind of want to, have your own space, have your own privacy, and do it your way.
Yep, that's right.
So,
yep.
So all pretty exciting. Now, let's talk about the new Pope. We haven't really had too much time to digest much about the new Pope. I think we can fairly assume he's Catholic. Although that's not always a given. In fact, in Francis's case, Francis may be actually undergoing a lengthy examination up in the heavenly quarters as to his true Catholic credentials.
Well, I think once you get to heaven, I don't think there's religion. So there's that.
You don't think God has a copy of all the encyclicals goes, hey, listen, you've deviated quite a bit from the encyclical of 1387, not to mention the Council of Trent. You're out of sync with the Council of Trent.
No.
Well, no. I'm a little suspicious of the fact that this guy's from Chicago. Generally not a good
what's
sign.
his name? Prevost.
Yeah, not Provost. He sounds like Provost of a university, but no, it's Prevost.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first picture I saw of him, Leo.
Even though his name is Robert.
Well, they all take another name.
Oh.
That's why, there was Pope Pius, then, John Paul II was, if you remember, he has a Polish name.
Oh, I don't remember. What was his name? Do you remember?
It was Wojtyła.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that was his actual Polish name. But he took John Paul II. And then, as you remember, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger became Benedict. Benedict was his papal name. And so this guy is going to be Leo. If you look at his first picture, it's very traditional. He's in like papal purple with the sash. So it looks like his at least initial image. He's not trying to look hip. He's not trying to look like the Bohemian Pope. And now, from early social media posts, he does seem to be somebody who is a critic of Trump and the Trump administration on the immigration issue. But you made the point that
most Catholics, or the Catholic Church in general, maybe not the conservative cardinals, but in general, very pro-illegal immigration.
Well, I think it's a case where they have a lot of vested interest in this because Catholic Charities is one of the largest NGOs.
Yeah.
It's gotten
It's really sad that that's the reason, and not because you're truly humbled by these people and you want to help them because they you're supposed to help your fellow man.
No, I think that they do give that reason. I mean, they will say that there is no such thing as a stranger.
But is that the real reason?
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I do think that they have not only because they will invoke a biblical justification, but there is also buttressed by a financial interest. That can't, that's
Quite
something
sad. Very sad.
People do take into account, though. It's hard to ignore completely. All right, let's talk about Mark Zuckerberg. Let me read this to you. This is actually, I think, quite amusing. Mark Zuckerberg is explaining how Meta is creating personalized AI friends to supplement your real ones. And listen to his justification. Quote, very Zuckerbergian formulation. The average American has 3 friends, but has a demand for 15. So he's obviously referring to some kind of a survey, maybe even a meta survey. How many friends do you have? Most people answer 3.
Do you think it's actually not really a survey and it's actually him wanting friends?
Well, if you look at his picture,
you think he's like, I only have 3 friends and I really want 15, but I'm going to say it's a survey.
Well, let's just put it this way. By and large, as you know, if you're a billionaire, people will flock to you because you have a very cool yacht and you've got a mansion and you probably have an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So by and large, people who are billionaires have like 87 friends. But if Mark Zuckerberg has less than 3, that tells you a lot.
That's true, but he's probably a little annoying. He's probably hard to be around.
He's extremely, and he's not only annoying, when you see interviews with him, well, he tries to come across as a normal guy. And you'll always see, I think that's the reason for why he has a t-shirt, he's wearing typically like a little chain, he's in jeans, torn jeans. He's trying to give I'm a normal guy vibe. I think he is the ultimate, he's like, you could call him a geek's geek. Because when geeks get together, there's probably like a super geek. I think he fits that definition.
You think he's a super geek?
I think he's a super geek, which, by the way, is not entirely a criticism because I do think that, look, geeks, their strength is that they focus kind of laser-like on a particular topic or idea or invention. And so they're often pioneers in certain, particularly high-tech industries.
Can I give a little bit of advice to the girls out there in high school? Okay,
go for it.
Just because this is my
experience. I know there's a slight autobiographical dimension to this, but go ahead.
So as you know, I was a cheerleader in high school, and I didn't exactly go after geeks. I think my idea of a boyfriend was a football player, basketball player. But in retrospect, how I wish I had dated geeks.
Well, you pointed out that
we're not talking about that.
Well, no. I'm simply saying that one of the guys in your class who was a geek went on to a very successful.
He was very successful. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not talking.
You're not going to go into the details.
No, but anyway,
you're making a general point.
I'm making a general point.
Namely, that you were homecoming queen, you were all this stuff, and so. But you had this idea that it would be cool to date the big man on campus. and you
Not
skipped
so much.
over some of the guys who
Yeah.
were, because you're like, oh, that guy's too
So let's
studious.
not talk about me anymore. This is
I noticed you've suddenly gotten a little bit jittery about the topic, probably because some of your friends listen to the podcast,
Yes,
and they're going to be
for
putting
sure.
they're going to be
Yeah, they're
putting
gonna be
names
like,
and faces.
Oh, yeah, no, but the I guess the moral of the story is that don't go after the athlete, go after the guy with the brains, because he's going to be the best catch for you. And I'll leave it at that. So
Yeah. Now, what about this business with Zuckerberg and friends? Because it looks to me like, and some of the people, by the way, have commented to this effect, saying, look, one of the effects of social media obsession, and there are people evidently, and you may think I'm one of these people, who scroll on social media so much that they become a little removed from human contact. Now, you can't really say that's true of me. I don't do that.
No.
But
only for a few minutes.
Right.
I'm like, Dinesh, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, huh? Yeah. Mhm. And I go, did you hear anything I said?
and what do I typically?
And you're like, no. Why not? Because he was too busy on Twitter tweeting. Like he has these like tweets that he like really formulates, and like you spend about 10 minutes thinking about
Yeah.
a tweet that you're going to tweet, and so I'm telling you the news of the day, or something that I think is important. And what
is
happens?
important? No. I do digest it.
So
well, what
anyway.
often happens
but you
is
don't have you don't go into Meta and go into metaverse.
I don't spend any
and-
time on Meta at all.
But-
And let alone in this whole artificial world
Right.
that they're talking, and they're very proud of it. I guess where I was going with this is that there are people saying social media creates the problem, where people have less human contact. That's why you have people who go on dates and both people are on their phones, or even families that go out together, but instead of chatting, they're on their phones. So it creates the problem of isolation and loneliness and detachment. And then it supplies an AI solution. Hey, listen, we've cut you off from your friends. Why don't we supply you with some AI friends? It's almost like saying, I'm going to stab you with a knife and then provide the bandage. I've created the problem that I now propose myself as a solution to. That's basically what Zuckerberg, I think,
Yeah.
is saying.
And just so everybody is clear on this, I sometimes come up with a thumbnail, but I did not this time. Friends without benefits.
Well, that was my...
That was Dinesh. And I at first thought, no, we're not doing it. And then I was like, that's actually kind of funny.
Right, right.
So, but what you're saying is that these friends are fake. Obviously, they're just made up, and it could be a little dangerous, actually.
Could be a little dangerous. Look, I mean, there could be a benefit to it in this sense. If you're a person who has fairly particular interests, whether, let's just say you're a stamp collector, or let's just say you like history, right? It's not going to be that easy in a normal environment where, let's just say you're in high school. How do I find a friend who's going to share my love of history, let's just say, or my love of stamps, or my love of chess, or anything, by and large, because it's a limited universe, right? It's a
You're
handful
not
of...
advocating what I think you are.
No, what
to
I
get one of these fake friends that likes chess, and you're like, hey, how you doing? Let's play a game of chess. Oh, actually, you do play a game of chess with a computer.
I do.
Oh, I forgot.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say
yeah.
there's a small version of this, except those people aren't fake. They're real people.
No, they're real people on
chess.com. In chess.com, these are
Yeah.
people all over the
That's
world.
right.
And I've now
But
noticed...
you can play a computer on chess.com,
You can
right?
play a computer for sure.
Okay, there
But
you
I
go.
think it's more fun because when you're playing a real person, and typically it is somebody in Asia or in Europe. I rarely get some guy from Africa, let's say, to play. And it's people of your own level. So now I've actually noticed that there are people who I don't recognize because they have chess names. And so...
Well, you have a chess name,
And I have a
too.
chess name.
Yeah.
So people will not say I'm like Tom Smith.
No.
In fact, very often they'll take the world champion. Let's say the world champion is actually Magnus Carlsen, even though he's technically not the world champion. But they'll be Carlson Slayer, the guy's chess name. And so I'm playing Carlson Slayer. So I recognize that, not the guy's name. Well, look, I think that an artificial intelligence is going to change things in the next 10 years in very dramatic ways in the workforce. And it's quite obvious that will also be true in the culture.
I remember about, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago in the 80s, a movie came out about a guy that fell in love with his computer. Do you remember that one?
You told me about it.
Yeah. And it was basically kind of like that. It was a AI person. And this was like in the 80s. So this is way before any of this. And I thought, how ridiculous. Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not to mention,
Wow.
I mean, I think in some ways the most far-seeing of those types of movies is The Terminator.
Oh, of course,
right?
That too, yeah.
Because think about it. The Terminator begins with the idea that human beings have created these machines.
Mm-hmm.
The machines have gotten smarter. Human beings have carelessly allowed the machines to take over because the machines are capable of making judgments, and they're in fact smarter than humans, and not to mention stronger, obviously. So you now have a world where human beings become the serfs of the machines. And when Elon Musk and others talk about the dangers of AI,
That's one of them.
They're invoking this exact same theme.
Yeah, that's one of them. Now, the other interesting twist to this would be if how today the way we treat our law enforcement, a lot of times we treat them like dirt, demonize them. They actually have to take it upon themselves to like really survive on the job, basically. Wouldn't it be something if we had AI cops and they were robots and they were badass and they could like snap your neck at any moment's notice?
Yeah, either
Can you
that
imagine?
or they're invulnerable to human intimidation.
Right. They can't be intimidated. They're machines, but yet they're powerful enough to stop a crook, to stop if they're in a police chase, they bullets don't matter. The criminal could be shooting them and they just keep walking.
Well, there are two things that happened this week. One is in the Northwest, I think in Washington State. You see these Antifa thugs, and the cops are retreating. They're retreating down a hill as Antifa advances. And so I'm sure a lot of this is driven by the political authorities. It's not that the cops are incapable.
Where is this at? What state?
Like Washington State.
Okay, well, yeah.
It's the Seattle, Portland area.
Yep.
I mean, in other words, this is like Antifa headquarters. Yep. But a different story was at Columbia, where they took over a building, the activists did, but the cops were really smart. Basically, what they did was they surrounded the building. They not only made a bunch of arrests, but they also forced everybody to take off their mask and give them their ID. So this is a way of saying, and in fact, I saw Marco Rubio posting yesterday or a day before, basically saying, we're going to be checking out to find out if there are illegals in these protests, we're going to be looking to deport them.
Good, because if there are illegals, they are terrorists, in my opinion. These people that are protesting this Gaza thing, they're terrorists.
You've heard me talking a lot about the Juvent Micro Impact platform these last few months and how Debbie and I have made it a part of our daily lives. But let me tell you why we're sticking with it. It's more than just a pain solution. It's an investment in your future. Juvent is FDA registered. It's designed to safely support your bones, joints, and overall mobility, all in just 10 to 20 minutes a day from the comfort of your home. If you've been around, you've heard me list all kinds of incredible benefits that you'll notice once you start using the Juvent platform, but better balance, improved posture, and reduced inflammation are a few more that I haven't mentioned yet. All things that are critical as we age. Forget the shake plates. This is smarter, safer technology. There's a 6-week risk-free trial, financing options, and a $300 discount with code Dinesh at checkout. Go to juvent.com/Dinesh. Give yourself the gift of real, lasting health. Juvent will help you keep up with the people and activities you love most. In the Soviet Union, totalitarianism came with gulags, secret police, and brute force. But in the West, it looks different. It's soft, it's subtle, it comes cloaked in compassion and compliance. Live Not by Lies by Angel Studios is a new docu-series. It exposes how this soft totalitarianism is already taking root in America and beyond. Based on Rod Dreher's best-selling book, the series shares the testimonies of men and women who lived through communist regimes and now see disturbing parallels in today's world. They warn of the dangers of conformity, the erosion of religious freedom, and the rise of ideological control in schools and businesses. But this isn't just a warning, it's a call to action, a reminder that truth is worth standing for. If you care about faith, family, and freedom, Live Not by Lies is required viewing and only available on Angel Guild. Join today by visiting angel.com/Dinesh. Stream Live Not by Lies along with hundreds of other films and shows. That's angel.com/Dinesh. You know, our good friend David Horowitz died.
Yes.
And we talked
Very
about
sad.
it, but we haven't talked about it on the podcast. There's a very interesting exchange that he had with one of these Palestinian activists who gets up and, is on her high horse, and she's, wearing the
Very famous clip.
headscarf, right? And David is very calm, and David says, "Listen, before we get any further, and I'm happy to answer your questions, will you condemn Hamas?" And as it turns out, she will not.
Of course
and
not.
And then David goes on to talk about the fact that he even spells out that it is in the charter of these terrorist groups to hunt down Jews and Israelis. And he says, will you repudiate that? Will you repudiate this exact statement, which is in their platform? And not only does she not repudiate it, she embraces it, right? And so what you have, and it doesn't take a lot of pressure to bring this out, is that these are not just advocates of children or, be more careful so you don't have civilian casualties. These are out and out supporters of Hamas.
I mean, I call them the propaganda wing of Hamas. They are.
Right. And Hamas seems very well aware that they have a global network they can count on in the media, in the legal community,
the young
in the
people.
academic community, students, and all that Hamas has to do kind of is like ring the bell. And these people are like often running to like perform their public relations function. It's a very weird to put it that way because they all pose as if they're, and when this kid who was arrested at Columbia, and he's been temporarily released pending his process, but he comes out, and he's very cocky, and he basically says, "I'm against war," as if he's making a neutral position. I'm sure he's not against the original October 7 attacks, right? That's what kicked off the war. It's kind of like saying, the Japanese bomb at Pearl Harbor, we're not supposed to do any retaliation. We're not supposed to kill any civilians. The rules of war apply to us, but not to them. And then someone comes out and goes, "I'm against war," even though I said nothing when the Japanese bombed in the first place.
That's right. No, I mean, look, you can talk about war and about casualties of war and everything, but these monsters went into homes. How would you feel if a person, terrorist or whatever, came into your home, raped and murdered your grandmother, raped and murdered your little girl, put your baby in an oven, and shot your dog?
And you know what? Let's push this even further, because this is actually a great analogy. And let's just say you now, driven to despair and rage and righteous indignation, right? Let's just say you pull out your AK-47, you pull out your AR-15, and you go after the bad guys. And guess what? They're all in their car, and when they come out, they're holding their own kid hostage. Their arm is
right.
wrapped around their kid, and they basically go, if you shoot at me, you're going to kill my kid.
That's right.
I mean, isn't that
That's Hamas.
That's Hamas
It
in a
is,
nutshell,
in
right?
a nutshell.
And isn't it true that in that situation, you or I or anyone similarly situated would be like, how evil is this? You not only perpetrate this evil act, but now you think you can get out of it by grabbing your own wife or grabbing your own kid and daring me to shoot.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if anything, this exposes the even more
Barbarism.
bottomless barbarism of Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even the Japanese didn't do this. Neither did the Nazis. And what I mean by that is that the Nazis realized, okay, listen, we have inflicted terrible harm on you. We're not too surprised that you're doing the same to us because we started it.
That's right.
Right? And I think the Japanese, the same thing. In a way, they surrendered after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they couldn't, in effect, say, you didn't have the right to retaliate after we came to your country and wiped out half of your
population.
your naval force and
and
planes.
Yeah. No, and what these Hamas people do, it's just incredible. The IDF will tell the Palestinian civilians to leave.
Get out.
Get out. Get out. And the Hamas people grab them and go, not so fast. They literally hold them hostage. So they know that their headquarters are on top of a daycare, on top of a hospital, on top of just a house with a family. They don't care. They're evil.
You know, honey,
as
one
evil
of
can be.
the fascinating elements of our Israel trip, and we can push into this a little bit, is that one of the members of our film team, now not our film team from America, because we just went with the skeleton, just really the four of us, but we had a local film team in Israel. And one of those guys was, in fact, in the Israeli reserves.
That's right.
Right? And you chatted with him, and you were telling me that this is the guy who actually detonates explosives.
That's right.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so he told me that he's the guy that will, detonate a certain building that is that they're told is where one of the Hamas terrorists are,
is hiding,
right? Or the mastermind or whatever. So he does that. But the other thing that he told me that was very interesting is he said, Hamas will put cameras everywhere, just anywhere and everywhere, right? And they have lost so many dogs because the dogs go to sniff out the IEDs. Is that what they're called? IEDs?
They're these, explosive devices.
Explosive devices. And so they have killed so many dogs doing that, right? But also with the cameras, they know when the IDF is in front of a building. So they will bomb the building to kill the IDF.
Oh, I see. I thought you were about to say that the purpose of the cameras is for propaganda purposes,
No,
they can say, oh, look at this rubble.
No, the camera, they probably use it for that as well, but the camera is to know where they are so they can send an explosion there and kill the IDF soldier. So he says, that they have to figure out where the cameras are. And I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, can I pray for you? Because I just felt compelled to pray for him because they need protection. These people are not, they're so evil. I can't even imagine going into their domain.
Well, when you're standing, as we did, just 700 yards, not feet, 700 yards from Gaza, you just have this sense that, in fact, not just a sense, we could see, we could hear.
And smell.
Smoke. It's a war zone, right? And we had some interesting experiences in Israel. One of them that I want to mention is that not many days after we returned, this big Houthi bomb goes off where? Where we were, Tel Aviv airport. And it was the first explosion that I know of at the airport that. And of course, the Israelis immediately hit back.
Everyone's like, you mean the Iron Dome didn't get it? I was like, I guess not.
It got through.
Yeah, but when we landed in Tel Aviv, when we went, I got a notification on my phone that that the Houthis had bombed like nearby.
Yeah.
And I was getting a little like nervous because here we were landing.
Well, one of the things they tell you, and this, by the way, they also told us when we went in 2022, in the last 30 minutes of the flight,
Yep.
You cannot move. Everybody has to be in their seat. No going to the bathroom, no getting up. They lock the bathroom doors. And so it is
I remember, this is not funny, but while we were on the flight about to land, in that 30-minute window, somebody inevitably got up and they got yelled at. Remember?
Oh, right. They start screaming at the guy, sit down, sit down.
Sit down.
They're very strict about it because this must be an Israeli government regulation, and it applies to all airlines.
And I was asking, I was like, why is that a thing? I thought, listen, if they bomb the airplane, I mean, does it really matter if we're standing up or sitting down or sealed?
You know what I think it is?
But,
I was thinking about it.
Yeah, your theory is probably
correct. My theory is this. It has nothing to do with shooting down the airplane.
Yeah.
It has to do with the fact that if you are a terrorist on the airplane, then they don't mind. I mean, it's bad enough if you explode the airplane over the sea, but they don't want you to use the airplane as a missile to go into Tel Aviv airport. Or obviously to go into Tel Aviv and into the buildings and the highways. So their basic point is that we're going to try to immobilize you as far as possible for the last 30 minutes of the flight so you can't be a bad guy.
So let me ask you a question, and this is kind of a loaded question. Do you think that they would ever hire any Muslim pilot to fly into Tel Aviv?
That's a really interesting question because now I would guess that if it's El Al, the Israeli airplane, the Israeli national airline, the answer would be no.
But don't you think even if it's not?
So that's the question.
Don't
So
you
we
think?
flew on United, and there are obviously other airlines that go into, we see, at Tel Aviv airport. So that's a good question.
Well, and let me also say that I know that they do profile. And
No
why?
question.
And why do I know this? Because they profiled us.
They profiled us. Now, at the airport, we got this really cool thing, which is really fantastic, which is we got to circumvent the normal immigration process. But it doesn't exempt us from the fact that when we go into this kind of VIP side thing, they know everything about you. They know who you are. They know why you're there. So in other words, they don't rely on these kind of mechanical things like, show me your passport, I'm going to compare your photo. Their idea is we need to know who this person is.
Well, as we were going to the airport, they stopped us.
Right.
And I got a little freaked out.
This was this was on the way back
to the airport. Yes, this is on the way back to the airport. But what I mean by profile is they obviously thought I was not an Israeli.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And not to mention it happened for the second time.
And they obviously knew you weren't either, right?
Right.
So they were very, like, they checked our luggage, they had us pull over, and then they even asked you, who was I?
Right, because I think in the profiling, this is how they do the quick sketch, right? They look over you, they look over me. They go, Dinesh is obviously from India. Because I have Indian features, I have Indian skin color. So they're like, this guy is not like a problem in Israel. In fact, India, as you know, is friendly to Israel. But they were like, who's the woman, right? And you have very dark eyes. I think they thought you might be Arab, or you might be from North Africa, or you might, I don't think they knew.
They didn't know.
Yeah.
And I happen to have a little Jewish in me too, which is funny because I don't have Arab.
But I mean, you don't look Jewish.
No, I know.
And not to mention the fact that when you were stopped the first time, this is before.
Oh, yes.
What happened is we had been in the River Jordan.
Yeah, I had a hair thing on me.
Right. So you actually looked somewhat like you could be from like Ramallah. right?
Yes.
And so
Yes, and
the guard who was basically this
was
young
a woman with
a
an
big,
AK-47.
yeah, she's like,
give me your passport. I'm like, I don't have my passport, but I have my license, and I'm like shaking. She probably thought, oh gosh, this woman is not from Pakistan, from Palestine.
But I mean, it shows you that in that country, and I think this is a matter of necessity, particularly now, they have internal checkpoints.
That's right.
So when you go to the airport, there's a checkpoint before you get into the airport complex.
No, I mean, I can't blame them. I would actually like to be a little more like them in America.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Because, I've always said that I think we go through TSA, pre-check and all that stuff. And I think the next attack on an airplane is not going to come from a passenger. I've always said that. So that's what prompted me to ask.
It's going to come from a pilot.
I think so. A pilot,
it's certainly
a flight
the
attendant.
cleverest way to do it because those people, think about it. Everybody has to sit down 30 minutes before the flight ends. Not the pilot, not the staff.
That's
they can move around.
The crew, right?
The crew.
So the flight attendant sometimes goes into the cockpit to relieve the pilot when he goes into the restroom, right? Well, I'm just saying it could happen. It could happen.
I mean, it's certainly a possibility they need to be aware of.
Yeah, but I don't think they are.
It needs to be integrated into the screening processes for pilots. Mike Lindell and the MyPillow team want to say a big thank you for your continued support this spring. They had a huge allotment of their famous bed sheets set aside for the big box stores, but guess what? The stores didn't come through again, so Mike is doing what he does best. He's passing the savings directly on to you. That's right. No middleman means you get wholesale pricing on their top-of-the-line Giza Dream Sheets and Percale bed sheets. And listen to this. The Giza Dream Sheets, queen size, normally $139.98, now just $69.99. The Percale sheets, queen, normally $89.98, now just $29.98. All sizes are available at a discount rate too. These are premium sheets at prices you won't find anywhere else, but they won't last long. When they're gone, they're gone. Don't wait. Call 800-876-0227. Again, it's 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Make sure to use the promo code DINESH Dinesh to grab this exclusive deal. Sorry, let's talk about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Now, what I think is kind of funny is that there was a time just a couple weeks ago when every Democrat, it seemed, was either going or planned to go or had been to El Salvador to check this guy out, right? And I know there was a female congressman who's like, I'm never leaving El Salvador. Of course, she in fact left shortly thereafter because I saw her back on the floor. But this guy was he was like their George Floyd.
He was their hero.
He was their Hispanic George Floyd.
He was their Hispanic George Floyd.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly it stopped. Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland was just, he makes these clips of himself on social media. Sure enough, he's now blasting Trump for trade and some other stuff. And I'm like...
He forgot about
Kilmar Garcia. And I think we know why, right?
Yeah.
Which is, number one, this guy has turned out to be a domestic abuser with now recordings of complaints that were made by his wife. His wife that has suddenly become very friendly to him because she's raising money off of his name. But the other thing, more recent, this week, a few days ago, Kilmar Garcia was evidently in a car.
A human smuggler.
A trafficker. And in fact,
who knew?
I guess the guy that stops the car even makes some comment to that effect.
Yeah.
So suddenly his case is it started out Maryland man.
Maryland man.
He was just a Maryland man.
That's right.
Right? And then it turned out that they made it sound like he had a clean record for no reason at all. He had just been grabbed based upon a wrong understanding that he's not MS-13.
Yeah.
And they sent him to this horrible prison.
Yeah.
Well, first of all,
and this ex-gangster goes on social media and goes, hey, I know that he's MS-13 because of his tattoos.
Right.
Because he was in a gang and he knows how they camouflage those tattoos. And so they're code for MS-13. What
right. What I found interesting from that gang member or ex-gang member's account is that the MS-13 guy is not going to write MS-13. So one way that he can do it is he will take M and he will take each letter. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and so he figures out what M is. He puts that number on his knuckles, and similarly for S. So, but obviously to anyone with any kind of knowledge, they know he's MS-13 because in a sense it's a type of a password or a code.
That's right.
Right? But of course to like Terry Moran of ABC News or, someone on MSNBC, they're like, we don't see the letters MS-13, so he can't be MS-13. Right?
Yeah.
So suddenly you have...
And the congressmen and senators,
same thing.
Democrats, they're going to die on a hill for this guy. And he turns out to be a really bad guy and an MS-13 member. So I think he is right where he belongs and where he should stay.
Yeah, I do hope, though, that there needs to be some turning of the tide with these judges because there are too many. I mean, basically, you have about 650 of these judges. Let's assume that about a half of them are appointed by Democrats. You have 300 people who can essentially corral the Trump administration on every single thing that they do.
But I mean, can't people I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, just a normal person that's just not political, right?
Yeah.
Can't you see that the majority of the illegals that were like gang members and really bad people came through a very porous border because of Biden, i.e. a Democrat? And then can't they see that the majority of these judges that are trying to stop Trump from deporting these people are also Democrat? Can't they see there's like a correlation?
I think these judges don't care. And I say that because now, if you're a congressman or you're a senator, you're going to worry about this, right? Because you think if people can see through it. This is why I think Senator Chris Van Hollen has dropped the topic, because he has to run for re-election at some point, right? But imagine if you are like Judge Tanya Chutkan in D.C. You're not up for election. You have tenure.
That's true.
And not to mention the fact that in your judicial circle, when you go eat at the Monocle restaurant with 3 other of your judicial buddies or your journalist buddies, they're like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. You stopped Trump dead in his tracks. So these guys love this. This is their motive. It's not a monetary motive. It's that they become heroes and heroines inside of their own social circle.
Yeah, true.
I think that Chief Justice Roberts here is moving way too slowly in slapping this down. And ultimately, it is the credibility of the judiciary itself that is at stake here, because if you have judges just, taking things that Trump is doing that are obviously within his authority and just slapping him down, I think that there's going to have to be some reckoning. At some point, I think even the executive branch is going to be like, listen, we're just doing our job. Tariffs, trade deals, returning illegals to their own countries. This is our function. This is why we have a government. And this is why I was elected by the American people, and no one gave the judges an automatic veto on me performing legitimate constitutional functions.
Yeah, and our judges really didn't do this to Biden.
Not at all. In fact, if you think through Biden's actions, I mean, there were a few judges that put holds on Biden, but nothing compared in volume to Trump. And second, like the only case that I can think of a Biden action, a unilateral action, unsupported by Congress, was the loan forgiveness. And even there, when the court acted, Biden was still able to do some loan forgiveness.
Yeah.
I mean, he basically either went around it or he circumvented it, or he pretended like he was following it. He didn't implement it comprehensively, but he did forgive a bunch of people despite this fairly decisive court ruling.
Yeah, and nothing happened to him.
Nothing happened to him. All right, what else do we have on our...
Yeah, so Newark.
Wow,
you're going to be flying into Newark.
I'm flying into Newark. I'm actually speaking at Right to Life.
Yes.
Riley Gaines is also speaking.
Yes.
And
but the Newark, one of the things that so the lady that cleans my teeth, her husband is an air traffic controller in Houston. And she told me something very interesting that I did not know. And that is that they get 45 days off when they feel like they're too overwhelmed.
Like a traumatic event.
Yes, like they feel like, oh, I have got to, they get this. This is part of the of their package.
This is allowed.
This is allowed. And so she says that in Newark, a lot of this is happening. Plus, they're doing renovations on the runways. Plus, because there's a lot of this happening, and a lot of air traffic controllers are retiring, they're short-staffed. Plus these guys, and then the Philly office or air traffic control place is not up to date with like the new stuff, right?
Well, just the very idea that air traffic control functions out that are supposed to be out of Newark are being transferred to Philly is, I don't think, a good thing. Why? Because there is a human dimension. And in fact, we've seen enough of these like accident reconstruction type of documentaries where the air traffic controller is looking out of the window.
Visible.
Yeah. And he can see there's fog that is approaching, or he can see that the airplane has gone past runway C and is now making a wrong turn on, runway D1. And so he can immediately message the pilot and go, hey, you've turned on the wrong runway. This kind of thing can happen. Now imagine if you are monitoring the situation from Philadelphia. You're not even there.
Yeah.
So this is a little problematic, and I think...
Well, a whistleblower just came out and said, do not fly into Newark. Like, literally. And you did change your flight.
I did move my flight to fly into, LaGuardia, which is...
better.
A little more.
But scary nonetheless. We need to fix that. Because Newark is a very, very busy airport, and it's an international hub, so they need to fix it.
Let's talk about cartels and about Mexico, because this is a case where Trump was trying to do a deal with the president of Mexico, this Jewish woman, Claudia Sheinbaum. And she evidently drew the line and said, no, you cannot conduct internal operations in Mexico against the cartels. And this got us talking about the fact that we think that she is compromised.
She's afraid. I think she's afraid. I'm not so sure she's in on it because they're not too keen on having women in the cartel, but I think she's very afraid that if she does...
So it's the reign of fear.
I think so, yeah. The cartels, they are terrorists because they terrorize their citizens.
Right.
They terrorize the political people.
Well, they terrorize their rival cartels. They terrorize the families of people that they, I'll kill your family if you don't do this or if you don't do that. So this is their modus operandi.
And they actually do take a lot of their cues from Hamas and Hezbollah.
Right.
So we know that. So they're very bad. And Trump, I guess Trump's idea was, listen, we could have some of our troops on the ground helping you with this. And she was like, absolutely not. We can cooperate, but not if you come. You cannot come into our country. You cannot have troops in our country.
I wonder if we talked about, you mentioned the idea of the cartels as an instrument of fear. I mentioned kind of being in on it. But there's a third possibility also, which we've heard happens even on our side of the border, which is the cartels are so rich.
Payoff?
That they are a major source of funding for political stuff. And so they funnel money to candidates. Yeah. They funnel money to candidates because I've heard of this happening in California and in Arizona, where cartel money is a factor.
Oh yeah.
And somebody was telling me about these congressional seats in Orange County, and they said, it makes no sense because in all these cases, in the larger Central Valley region of California, you have Republicans are leading. Then more votes come in at the last minute. The counting is extended multiple days beyond the election. And in almost every case, the Democrat wins. But here's the most striking thing of all. When that happens, the Republican is dead silent. Because normally, think about it, you've run a campaign, you've raised money, you've put in blood, sweat, and tears, you're winning. Then it all turns around 7 days after the election or 14 days after the election. You're going to file lawsuits.
Are you saying that the Republican is the one that's compromised?
That the Republican is the one that has been threatened.
Oh, threatened.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, that there are cartel figures.
I think Carrie Lake was threatened by cartels.
Well, she has, even to us, communicated that, not necessarily about herself, but the fact that the cartels are a powerful force in the Democratic establishment.
I think
in the Katie Hobbs.
I personally think that this is why Katie Hobbs won and why Carrie Lake lost in both races.
And not to mention the Attorney General is apparently a guy who has done work for cartel-affiliated organizations. Yeah. So think about it. If it is a presence and a force on our side of the border, think of how bad it is on that side of the border.
Oh, much worse. Much worse. Yeah, very scary.
Yeah, so Trump
very
is
scary. And then so on speaking of this side of the border, Dade Phelan, for those that don't know.
So let's say who Dade Phelan is. Explain.
So he is
because we've talked about him before, but people may not remember.
Right.
Who's this Dade
So
Phelan
he was
guy?
the former speaker for the Republican House in Texas. So state rep. So he lost that bid, but he did win his reelection as a state rep. Narrowly, yes, but he did win. And so he had this bill, apparently, that would make it illegal for someone to do a meme, a political meme, making fun of a candidate.
Right.
Right. So you could go to jail, up to 1 year in jail for doing that. And my thought is, was he just getting a lot of memes from people sending him that, where he had like a mustache or, of horns or something?
Well, we do remember that there was an episode where Dade Phelan was quite evidently
he looked drunk.
Completely drunk.
Yeah.
He was staggering and slurring his words.
Yeah.
Maybe that generated a whole bunch of memes.
Yeah, it could be that set him off.
Now let's think about it. Is there in fact is it possible that there is a case for some of this? Let's take an example. Let's say that Dade Phelan were to say, listen, you have two guys who are running for office, and somebody puts out a meme, let's just say, accusing one of them of being a child molester. It's false. It's not true, but he's being portrayed as a child molester, and there's a cartoon of him like molesting a kid, right? It obviously is damaging politically. It is factually false. What should be done in that kind of situation? Now, the truly free market guy is going to say, hey, listen.
Free speech.
It's free speech.
Yeah.
It may be offensive, but it is. Well, and it may even be false.
According to Dave Phelan, you're going to jail.
Right. But yeah.
But it passed. It passed.
No, it passed. It passed. Yeah. And I think what people are worried about is not even because I tried to make my case.
Worst possible.
Right.
Yeah,
I tried to frame it where it was obviously untrue, obviously unfair. I'm sure with Phelan and all these guys, they want to outlaw all kinds of legitimate criticism, appropriate mockery,
now, how does it
sarcasm,
work?
Babylon Bee stuff.
Yeah. How does that work? Because it's a state law. How does that work free speech wise? Like, can you override that? For example, if you get accused of putting a meme of Dave Phelan with horns and a big mustache and a tail, you get indicted, they put you in jail for a year. Can you appeal it and say, hey, I have every right under the U.S. law to do this meme? What happens?
Okay, so this is the way it works. By and large, our Constitution, being a federal Constitution, does not apply to the states. It applies to the federal government. So when it says Congress shall pass no law, let's say abridging freedom of the press, this refers to the U.S. Congress. It doesn't refer to the states. In fact, even in religious freedom, the national government was prohibited from having a national religion. That's the First Amendment. Free exercise of religion, no establishment. But as you know, in the early part of American history, states had official religions. You could have Puritanism in Massachusetts, and Anglicanism in Virginia, and so on. Now, in subsequent years, many of the rights that are in the Bill of Rights have been, the legal term is called incorporation. Incorporation means that it applies to the federal government and the states. And I think the First Amendment is one of those, which means that no, Texas or any other state cannot override the First Amendment even by state law.
That's what I thought. I thought that,
That doesn't apply to all our rights. Some of our rights are only protected at the federal level, and the states can abridge them.
Right, can do whatever.
Now, obviously, there are state constitutions. Remember, Texas, states have their own constitutions, and there could be a free speech clause in those. And then the state judge would use the Texas Constitution or the Wisconsin Constitution
to argue,
or the Maine Constitution, and say, no, this law violates the Constitution of Maine, and therefore we're striking it down. So there are two different ways to go. One is to argue, if you're arguing against this law, you'd say it is inconsistent with state constitutions, or alternatively, you can argue it's inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution, and that this particular right has now been incorporated.
It's just so dumb and so hard to believe that Texas is a red state when we have dumb things like this passing. Like we must have a house full of rhinos in the Texas House in order for this to have passed. Because you could say Dade Phelan's Dade Phelan. He's a rhino, and that's that. But the fact that it passed tells you, of course, all the Democrats are for it.
Well, that's my point. I was just going to say, it was another guy named Burrows, not Phelan, who got elected.
Yeah.
But Burrows is a Phelan guy.
Yeah.
He's a Phelanite, if you can call him that. And so in order for Burrows to get elected, there had to have been a majority of all the Democrats plus a slice of the Republicans gives you the majority.
So I'm thinking the slice of the Republicans are rhinos.
And they voted for this too.
That's right.
The same people who voted for Burrows voted for this as well.
I think that's the case.
And so you do have a real problem, which Democrats don't seem to have in blue states, which is you have a red state and not a purple state, but a red state that has a de facto, at least Democrat-leaning majority in the House of Representatives. It's a scandal, and something needs to be done about it.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.